Welcome to Elizabeth Reads. Today we have Tamsin Winter's book, Being Miss Nobody. We are on chapter 6, Voicemail. The next morning, I stood on my own in the quad, wearing where I had to go for assembly. I tried to follow Ella, but lost sight of her in the squash of people getting off the bus. I didn't like that everyone could probably see how red my face was because my hair was blowing all over the place. I scanned the groups of people and finally spotted a tall boy called Adrian, who was carrying a trumpet case and walked with another boy from my class, so I followed them across the quad and into a big gray building with stone steps. Inside, there was loads of people crowding in a long corridor. Some people were standing in lines, some were messing about. The ceiling was really high and it felt like it was full right up to the top with a million different voices except mine. Mr. Bryant was at the other end of the corridor near some big double doors, and when I got there, he was telling everyone to line up in alphabetical order. My surname is Banks, which means I have to go near the front, which I don't like. People were asking each other their names, and a boy said, "I'm Michael Bell," and kept asking me who I was. I stood there with my throat closed up and my words hidden in some kind of brain vacuum, feeling like I might just faint right there in probably the wrong place alphabetically. Mr. Bryant came over and said, "Okay, go in." And Michael kept saying "go" in my ear and tapping me until I finally managed to get my feet to walk forward, which wasn't easy when they actually wanted to run 1,000,000 miles in the opposite direction. Inside the hall was a sort of hushed quiet. People were whispering and teachers were saying shh. A man wearing glasses and a brown suit was standing at the front with his arms folded. Light was gleaming through the big windows onto my face like a big spotlight, and it felt as if hundreds of eyes were looking at me. My shoes squeaked on the wooden floor and my hands were sweating. I felt a bit like how I imagine a pirate must feel being forced to walk the plank, only instead of shark-infested waters, it was an enormous sea of the totally unknown that I might drown in. My heart was beating so fast I thought everyone must be able to hear it. Our class had to sit in the front row because we are class 7A, and the brown suit man, who turned out to be the principal, Mr. Enderby, walked up and down right in front of us. The question, "What if he picks on me to say something?" echoed in my head like someone coughing in the hall, but getting louder and louder and louder, which did not feel like a wonderful start to a new academic year, no matter how many times Mr. Enderby said it. I relaxed a little bit when he started talking about a girl in year 8 called Jenny Baker, who was on TV over the summer in this maths challenge quiz thing where you had to do hard sums really fast. He showed a clip of it on the screen and spent ages talking about her, even though she didn't win the quiz. He said 5th place out of everyone in the country is a tremendous achievement and everyone in the school should feel very proud. I remembered what Mrs. Quinney had told me and made sure I didn't feel too proud of Jenny. On the way out of the hall, I heard some people sniggering, and Ella poked me in the arm and said, "Why are you bright red?" All my words got tangled up in a big knot in my head. I shrugged. She turned to her friends Katie and Maisie and said, "See?" Then they laughed until the teacher shushed them. I walked as quickly as I could up the stairs to maths, feeling like my cheeks were on fire. I took a seat near the back next to the window. The rest of my class came in noisily, all taking seats that weren't the one next to mine. A boy called Connor Mold sat in the one directly behind me and said, "Oh, stop being so loud." And his friend Vinny said, "Yeah, stop talking so much." For the entire math lesson, whenever Mr. Pearson was at the other side of the room, Connor and Vinny would say things like, "Stop distracting us, stop talking." And every time Mr. Pearson would say, "Try to keep the noise down over there, young lady." And it reminded me of the things my Uncle Pete used to say. Even though I had known Uncle Pete and Auntie Marie for like ever, whenever they came to our house, I felt this massive sense of dread come over me like a tidal wave. I feel like this a lot. I could never say anything the whole time they were there, only nod or shake my head. Auntie Marie was always nice to me about it, but Uncle Pete used to make jokes like, "Hello, little Miss Chatterbox, stop being so noisy, Rosalind," and no one can get a word in edgewise with you around. Then when we were leaving, he would always say, "You can't spend your whole life not speaking to me, you know," which I did actually because they got divorced and I haven't seen him since. I don't think even Auntie Marie speaks to him anymore. I spent most of my lessons that day trying to hide my face in my new exercise books. It was only my second day at Manor High, but already I'd become the weird girl who can't speak, and the chair next to me was permanently empty. After lunch, instead of going to double sport, I stayed in the library for half an hour because I was leaving school early. I had to meet Octavia Welland, my new therapist, who was a specialist in speech therapy, which was another of Dr. Peak Not Peak's brilliant ideas. Only I was secretly quite pleased about this one. I just hoped my heart rate would be back to normal by then. I tidied up the books on the display, then went to reception and signed out. Dad was waiting for me just outside the school gates. When I opened the car door, he said in a robot voice, "Get in the car, subject 570358893." And when I got in, he said, "Prepare for your normalness therapy." I laughed a tiny bit. He said, "Was school okay?" And I smiled and nodded, which only felt like a 50% lie because I wasn't totally sure if nodding counted or not. The therapy building was next to the hospital, but not actually in the hospital, which I liked. It had a blue sign with white letters saying Sternberg Speech and Language Center, and there were little rows of perfectly round plants outside. When we parked, Dad said, "Want me to come in with you, Rosie?" Only I said no, because having Dad with me in a place where I might not be able to speak to him feels massively weird. It's one of the reasons we hardly ever go out anywhere as a family, and because Dad's obsessed with keeping Seb away from germs. Anyway, I wasn't too scared of meeting Octavia because of the message she'd left for me on Mum's phone the week before, telling me about the center and that I didn't have to speak to her in therapy. Her voice was warm and went up and down so much it sounded musical, like one of those big xylophones. And when she said bye, she said, "Bye," so that it went up at the end. I went through the doors and signed in on the special computer Octavia had explained about. I tapped the screen, then typed in my date of birth. My name came on the screen with the words, "Please take a seat," and a picture of a big smiley face. I liked this a lot because it meant I didn't have to speak to anyone. Everyone who goes to the center has some kind of issue with speaking, so they have a good understanding of what it must be like to be someone like me, which is a nice feeling. I sat in the waiting room, and after a few minutes, I heard the floor creaking, so I looked up and saw a lady with a big yellow scarf wrapped around her hair, and kind eyes, and a big half-moon smile. She was wearing keys on a string around her neck and a big beaded necklace, and a pair of glasses were hanging around her neck too, so every time she moved, she clinked and jingled and jangled. She said, "Hello, Rosalind, I'm Octavia. I'm so pleased to meet you. My room is back this way, so if you're ready, come along." Her voice sounded even nicer than it did on the voicemail. It filled the room with warmth and music, and I thought, already this is way better than Dr. Peek Not Peek, and not just because she didn't make any stupid jokes. In her room, there were certificates in frames that said things like direct speech management, neurolinguistic programming, and realizing the potential of children who stammer. I liked it that she had these because I also like getting certificates. I only got 2 from primary school, and I keep them in a special folder at home that Mum bought me. They are Super Speller and Reading Award, both from year 6. I seriously doubted I would get any from Manor High unless I gave out certificates for being weird and having no friends, in which case I would probably fill my folder by the end of term. The next thing I thought was how much Dad would hate this room because it was seriously messy. It was filled up almost to the ceiling with books. There were too many on the shelves, and piles of them were on the floor. Octavia stood at her desk rummaging around, and the whole time she sang a made-up song going, "Where are your notes, Mrs. O? I think she must have become a speech therapist because she is the exact opposite of me in that she literally cannot stop talking. She pulled out some crumpled papers from one of the drawers and then reminded me she didn't expect me to say anything. The main thing we will work on is not feeling afraid when you need to speak. She wrote it on a big bit of paper, which I liked because that is sort of how it feels. And although I thought she should maybe change it to not feeling like I want to spontaneously combust, she told me how she was going to help me and gave me a questionnaire to fill in while she hummed and sang and spoke about books I might like and told me about some charity websites and blogs about SM I could visit. There wasn't an awkward silence like there used to be with Dr. Peek Not Peek, and the room felt safe because she didn't have a gray recording box or ask me any questions. So I knew for sure she meant it when she said I didn't have to speak, which isn't what therapy used to feel like. At the end, when I was leaving, I said thank you really quietly, and Octavia smiled like she understood exactly how much I meant it. On the way out of the center, I was still smiling because I felt like Octavia's therapy was going to be totally different in a good way. But Dad was on his phone leaning against the side of the car saying, "Okay, don't worry, we'll come straight home." When he saw me, he hung up, then smiled, even though I could tell something was wrong. Once we were in the car, he said, "So, what was Octodoc like?" Which was what Seb called Octavia when he heard her name on Mum's answer phone. I said, "She's really nice. I think she's going to be able to help me." I said thank you to her at the end. Dad looked surprised and said, "Wow, really proud of you, Rosie. Mum will be thrilled. That will really cheer her up." Tears formed in his eyes, but he blinked them away, and then he started the engine and said in the robot voice, "Normalness therapy working. Very good." So I left feeling like maybe I was 1% less weird and wondering if Octavia might be one of those people Mrs. Quinney had told me about, who is not exactly an angel, but not exactly a normal person either. Because being able to say thank you to her when I'd only just met her felt like something resembling an actual miracle. When I got home, Seb was in his room and Mum looked like she'd been crying, even though she was smiling. Dad went straight upstairs and Mum started talking in the really cheerful voice she uses sometimes when she's trying not to cry. "So, how did you get on with Octavia?" Half of me told her about therapy, while the other half of me wondered what was happening with Seb. And when she asked me about school, I said it was good, which was a bit of a massive lie, but it felt easier than telling her what it was really like, which was bad. And later, when I asked if Seb was okay, Mum said, yes, he's absolutely fine, just tired. Which proves I wasn't the only one being not exactly truthful about stuff in my family. And that's the end of chapter 6. I'll see you next time.